My name is Mike, and for years, I worked the night shift as a security guard at a massive, long-abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. The factory had a reputation for being haunted, a fact that my partner Sarah and I often joked about. We never took the ghost story seriously, until one chilling night when our skepticism turned into sheer terror. The factory was a sprawling maze of rusted machines and crumbling hallways. Its eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creaking of metal or the distant howl of the wind. Sarah and I had seen it all during our time as security guards. Teenagers trying to sneak in, homeless people seeking shelter, and even the occasional wildlife. But on this particular night, something was different. It began with a series of strange occurrences. Lights that we had turned off would inexplicably flicker back on. Doors we had secured would be found wide open. At first, we dismissed it as a malfunctioning electrical system and the wind playing tricks on us. But as the nights passed, the incidents grew more unsettling. One night, as Sarah and I patrolled the factory floor, we heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. We exchanged uneasy glances and followed the noise, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. But when we reached the source, there was nothing there, just an empty corridor with no signs of life. We tried to rationalize it, blaming our overactive imaginations on the late-night fatigue. But deep down, we both knew that something was terribly wrong. Then came the night that would haunt us forever. We were in the security office, reviewing footage from the cameras when we saw it, a shadowy figure moving through the factory. It was human-shaped, but its movements were unnatural, jerky, like a marionette being manipulated by invisible strings. We rushed to the monitors, our hearts pounding, and followed the figure's progress through the factory. It seemed to be toying with us, appearing on one camera and then disappearing on another. We couldn't explain it, and our radios crackled with interference as we tried to call for backup. Desperation set in as we pursued the figure, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We rounded a corner and found ourselves in a massive, dimly lit chamber filled with rows of ancient machinery. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the figure. It turned to face us, and even in the dim light we could see its face, a grotesque mask of pale, withered skin and hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into our souls. It raised a bony hand, pointing a long, gnarled finger in our direction. We froze, unable to move as a guttural voice echoed through the chamber. It spoke words that we couldn't understand, words that seemed to sear into our minds like a branding iron. As the figure advanced towards us, we finally snapped out of our trance and fled, racing through the factory's labyrinthine corridors. We could hear the relentless pursuit of the figure behind us, its footsteps growing louder and more nightmarish with each passing moment. We reached the factory's exit, gasping for breath, and burst into the moonlit night. The figure didn't follow us outside. It seemed bound to the factory's cursed confines. But its malevolent presence continued to haunt us. We never returned to that factory. We quit our jobs and tried to put the horrifying experience behind us. We had come face to face with something beyond our understanding, and it had left us scarred for life. My name is Mark, and I used to work as a security guard at a remote industrial facility. It was a peaceful job, and I spent most of my nights patrolling the quiet premises, making sure everything was secure. But one night, I stumbled upon something that still haunts my dreams. The facility was surrounded by thick woods, and my only company was the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. It was a moonless night, and the darkness felt suffocating as I made my rounds. As I turned a corner of the facility, My flashlight beam fell upon a clearing in the woods. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. There, in the middle of the clearing, a group of cloaked figures stood around a roaring bonfire, their faces obscured by eerie masks. My heart raced as I watched them, my instincts screaming at me to retreat, but curiosity held me in place. I had heard tales of cults in the area, but I never thought I would stumble upon one in the middle of the night. The cultists chanted in an ancient, guttural language that sent shivers down my spine. In their hands, they held candles and daggers, and they moved in synchronized, ritualistic motions around the fire. As I continued to watch, I noticed a figure at the center of the cult, lying on an altar adorned with bizarre symbols. I couldn't see the person clearly, but I could tell they were bound and unconscious. A surge of fear and anger washed over me. I reached for my radio to call the police, but when I pressed the button, there was nothing but static. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to change the batteries in my flashlight, but when I finally got it working again and turned it back toward the clearing, the cult and their captive had vanished. The eerie silence had returned, as if the disturbing scene I had witnessed was nothing but a haunting illusion. My hands trembling, I continued my patrol, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods seemed to close in around me, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. I couldn't wait for the night to end. As dawn broke and my shift came to an end, I rushed to report the incident to my supervisor. He listened with a grave expression and told me to keep quiet about it, as he didn't want to cause panic among the other employees. But I couldn't keep it to myself. The encounter with the Satanist cult had shaken me to my core, and I needed answers. I began researching the symbols I had seen, delving into the history of cult activity in the area. The more I learned, the more I realized that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. As days turned into weeks, I became increasingly paranoid. I couldn't escape the feeling that the cultists knew I had seen them, that they were watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sleepless nights and endless fear took their toll on my sanity. I couldn't concentrate on my job, and I couldn't escape the lingering terror. I knew I had to leave to get as far away from that place as possible. I handed in my resignation and left the remote facility behind, never looking back. I moved to a different town, changed my name, and tried to put the nightmarish encounter behind me. A chilling reminder that some secrets are better left buried in the shadows. My name is Sarah, and for years I worked as a security guard at a large shopping mall. It was an uneventful job, mostly dealing with shoplifters and the occasional rowdy teenager. But one fateful night everything changed. It was a cold winter evening, and the mall was nearly empty as closing time approached. My fellow security guard, Mike, and I were stationed at opposite ends of the mall, ensuring that all the stores were secured before locking up for the night. Little did we know that an intruder had slipped in unnoticed. As I patrolled the dimly lit corridors, I had an uneasy feeling that something was amiss. The atmosphere was different, oppressive and silent, except for the distant hum of the heating system. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls, making me acutely aware of my isolation. I reached the far end of the mall and radioed Mike to check in. He responded with a static-filled acknowledgement, but his voice sounded tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and I quickened my pace. Just as I turned a corner, I saw him, a man dressed in black, wearing a ski mask and gloves. He was carrying a duffel bag filled with stolen merchandise from one of the stores. Panic surged through me as I realized I had stumbled upon a real robber in the act. Before I could react, the intruder spotted me and froze. For a moment we locked eyes, and in that instant I saw a chilling determination in his gaze. Without a word, he turned and sprinted down the corridor, disappearing into the mall's labyrinthine layout. I radioed for backup and gave chase, adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I pursued the robber through the dimly lit mall, I could hear his footsteps echoing ahead. Panic and fear surged within me, but my training kicked in, propelling me forward. The chase led us through deserted corridors, past closed storefronts, and into the mall's vast central atrium. I could see glimpses of the intruder as he darted between support pillars, always staying one step ahead. He was agile, and it was clear that he knew the mall's layout better than I did. I radioed Mike again, urging him to come to my location. His voice crackled over the radio, filled with frustration as he struggled to navigate the maze-like corridors. I was on my own, and the robber knew it. Just as I thought I had cornered the intruder, he vanished into a darkened store. I cautiously entered, my flashlight cutting through the blackness. The store was eerily silent, but I knew he was in there somewhere, waiting. Suddenly, he lunged at me from the shadows, and we grappled in the darkness. Adrenaline-fueled strength surged through me as I fought to restrain him. But he was relentless, and the struggle was fierce. During our fight, I caught a glimpse of his face, twisted with desperation and anger. He wasn't just a petty thief. He was a desperate man willing to do anything to escape. I managed to wrestle him to the ground and restrain him just as the backup arrived. Police officers swarmed the scene, and the intruder was arrested, his stolen loot recovered. As I sat there, adrenaline still surging through my veins, I realized that my life had been hanging by a thread. I had come face to face with a dangerous criminal, and it was pure luck that I hadn't been seriously injured or worse. In the days that followed, the incident haunted my thoughts. I couldn't escape the fear and trauma of that night. The mall had always felt like a safe place, but now it was tainted by the memory of that terrifying encounter. I handed in my resignation shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that my life was too precious to risk for the sake of a mall job. The encounter had left me with scars, both physical and emotional, that would never fully heal.